used to lose my place inside the middle of the book, forgetting every chapter and the weary path I took. The pages flipped around inside the blowing of the draft, a dizzy navigation on a sinking wooden raft. I used to fold the corners down to try to mark the space, leaving ugly creases on a very tender face. But you slid the metal marker right upon the current sheet, a gentle intervention for a runaway defeat. You did not tear the paper or manipulate the spine. You found the exact sentence and you drew a steady line. The metal holds the margin with a dedicated grace, a physical reminder of a safe and steady place. The brass bites the paper, but it never leaves a tear. You pinpoint my location and eradicate the fear, marking the line, holding the focus in the text. You do not let my story vanish in the rushing wind. You highlight the present and the places I have been. I do not have to wander through the volume in the dark. You slip the little metal and you leave a gentle mark, marking the line, holding the focus in the text. You do not let my story vanish in the rushing wind. You highlight the present and the places I have been. I do not have to wander through the volume in the dark. You slip the little metal and you leave a gentle mark. People skip the middle just to hurry to the end, ignoring the slow journey of a dedicated friend. But you appreciate the commas and the lingering delay. The brass is turning darker from the oils on my hand, a tactile destination I can finally understand. I close the heavy cover with the metal left inside, a secret little haven where my tired thoughts reside. Slide the metal down, find the proper page, anchor the intent, calm the rising rage. The story is a maze, but the marker holds the way. I trust the tiny brass as I navigate the day. I realize that loving is a very specific game, a willingness to recognize a very ordinary name. You do not read ahead or try to skip the slower part. You stay upon the sentence that is beating in my heart. The novel is expensive, full of tragedy and grace, but I am resting easy in my designated place. I look across the living room and see your steady eyes, a bright and open window to the clearing autumn skies. I leave the book upon the desk and step into the light, supported by the anchor you provided in the night, marking the line, holding the focus in the text. You do not let my story vanish in the rushing wind. You highlight the present and the places I have been. The pages are unblemished and the narrative is clear. I trust the steady metal that is waiting for me here. The book is closed, the place is saved. I am home.
Spiral
the garden tree, a twisting piece of metal meant for only you and me. The wind arrives in anger, pushing off the winter lake, a terrifying pressure that the timber has to take. I used to brace my shoulders against the rising gale, a frightened little actor in a terrifying tale. My mind was just a leaf blowing blind across the yard, a constant navigation when the atmosphere got hard. But you hung the decoration on a rusty iron hook to alter the dynamic of the weary path I took. The gale hits the metal and the spiral starts to dance, hypnotic rotation in a mesmerizing trance. You took the bitter weather and you gave it a design, a visual translation, making your affection mine. The invisible current, the panic into art. You do not try to fight the air or build a taller wall. You harness the momentum and eliminate the fall. I watch the copper spinning in the middle of the storm and find a steady center that is resonant and warm. Catching the breeze, turning the panic into art. You do not try to fight the air or build a taller wall. You harness the momentum and eliminate the fall. I watch the copper spinning in the middle of the storm and find a steady center that is resonant and warm. An unrelenting ghost, a force that likes to terrorize the things we value most. But watching the rotation gives the wind a gentle shake, a visual translation and a beautiful escape. The copper bears a patina of oceanic green, the bravest little instrument my tired eyes have seen. I stand beside the window and I watch the metal spin, erasing the anxiety of the era I am in. Watch the metal spin, let the storm arrive, see the graceful turn, keeping us alive. The tempest is a tyrant, but the copper finds the groove. I stand inside the garden and I let the shadows move. I realize that loving is a shifting of the view, a willingness to let the bitter weather filter through. You take the rushing terror and you give it a routine. A tree is swaying hard, but the spinner holds the gaze, a dizzying distraction from the complicated maze. I wrap my winter jacket and I step into the cold, trusting in the magic that the copper spiral holds. The storm is losing power as the rotation catches light. I lean into your shoulder and surrender to the night. Catching the breeze, turning the panic into safe inside. You do not try to fight the air or build a taller wall. You harness the momentum and eliminate the fall. The tempest hits the garden, but the spiral dances free. I trust the quiet rhythm that you manifest for me. The wind blows, the copper turns, I am safe. A white ceramic cup resting on the wooden board, a broken piece of pottery I previously ignored. The side is the side is moving round without a semicircle grip. We used to hold the handle when the water started to boil. a comfortable ending to the freezing winter toil. But yesterday the ceramic hit the corner of the sink, a devastating error making my tired spirit think. The handle broke in pieces, leaving only jagged clay. The liquid inside the vessel is inviting and so warm, a tiny little refuge from the rising winter storm. But I reach my open fingers to the surface of the white and feel a searing temperature attacking in the night. The contents are a comfort, but the holding is a burn, a painful realization on a solitary turn. Dropping the weight, staring at a burning out of reach. I try to hold the vessel, but the surface is too hot. A searing execution of the only thing we got. You cannot sip a comfort when the holding burns the skin. I back away, defeated from the era we were in. Dropping the weight, staring at it burning out of reach. I try to hold the vessel, but the surface is too hot. A searing execution of the only thing we got. You cannot sip a comfort when the holding burns the skin. I back away, defeated from the era we were in. I tried to glue the handle back against the painted white to orchestrate a rescue in the middle of the night. But boiling water weakens the adhesive in the crack. A miserable reality we are never getting back. We force the conversation, trying to reconstruct the past, expecting the connection to miraculously last. The mug is full of tea, but I cannot take a sip. I stand beside the table with the trembling lower lip. Touch the burning side, pull the fingers back, feel the hold of warmth on a ruined track. The liquid is inviting, but the touch is pure pain. I leave the broken ceramic and I step into the rain. I realize that love needs a safe and steady hold, a designated barrier against the bitter cold. You cannot force a hand against a radiating fire and justify the damage with the fabricated desire. We lost the mechanism that allowed us to partake. I leave the hot ceramic for my own exhausted sake. I toss the broken handle in the bottom of the trash and watch the good intentions turn to undeniable ash. I walk out of the kitchen and I leave the drink behind, the sobering conclusion for a complicated mind. Dropping the weight, staring at a burning out of reach. Dropping the weight, staring at a burning out of reach. Let it dry, staring at a burning out of reach. Dropping the weight, staring at a burning out of reach. Dropping the weight, staring at a burning out of reach. Time to stop, staring at a burning out of reach. I try to hold the vessel, but the surface was too hot. I surrender the illusion of the only thing we got. You cannot sip a comfort when the holding burns the skin. I leave the broken ceramic and let the healing begin. The tea goes cold, the cup is broken, I am done. We used to light the wick and place the crystal chimney down to shield a little fire from the breathing of the town. The glass was a protector, keeping all the breezes out, a transparent defender from the suffocating doubt. But careless hands collided with the fragile clear design, erasing the perimeter of your history and mine. The chimney fell to pieces on the surface of the floor, leaving the interior defenseless to the core. I struck a wooden match to bring the yellow aura back, to resurrect the safety on a devastated track. The flame ignited briefly, but the window let a draft, a fatal interruption to a sinking, fragile raft. The crystal sits in splinters scattered on the wooden tile. The fire is defenseless and it doesn't last a while. Exposed to the wind, fighting in the center of the dark, I try to strike a match to bring the yellow aura back, but breezes kill the fire on an unprotected track. You cannot hold a flame when the perimeter is dead. I stare at the destruction of the bitter words we said. Exposed to the wind, fighting in the center of the dark. Ooh, I try to strike a match to bring the yellow aura back. Oh, but breezes kill the fire on an unprotected track. You cannot hold a flame when the perimeter is dead. I stare at the destruction of the bitter words we said. I swept the jagged fragments in a tiny plastic bin, a visual reflection of the trouble we are in. I watch the naked cotton try to catch a steady glow, a desperate endeavor in the only life I know. But drafts invade the room from underneath the timber door and suffocate the ember I was lighting matches for. We lost the fragile boundary that made the passion safe, replacing our devotion with a miserable chase. Strike the wooden stick, watch the orange fade, fail to keep the light in the choices made. The open air is ruthless to an unprotected core. I leave the darkened brass upon the bedroom floor. I realize that passion needs a shelter to survive, a dedicated border just to keep the heat alive. We shattered the protection with an arrogant neglect and ruined the foundation we were aiming to protect. I drop the matchbook down and I blow the smoke away, accepting the reality of this extinguished day. I do not need to fight a wind I know is going to win. I walk into the hallway where the colder drafts begin. The lamp is a skeleton sitting useless on the wood. I walk away from fighting for the things we understood. Exposed to the wind, fighting in the center of the dark. Let it drop. I try to strike a match, but the perimeter was dead. I surrender the illusion and clear my tired head. You cannot hold a flame when the crystal falls apart. I turn away completely and I save my weary heart. The glass is broken, the room is dark, I am gone. Rectangle of fabric mounted on a ceiling frame. I draw the empty highway heading to the setting sun, a glaring illustration of the day that was almost done. The golden light was blinding, crashing through the open glass, a devastating hazard, watching all the traffic pass. I squinted hard against it, trying to maintain the line. A dangerous endeavor on this weary road of mine. My eyes were tearing up and struggling to see the break. A recipe for making the irreversible mistake. But you reached up and pulled the faded visor softly down. A sudden intervention on the highway out of town. The shadow cut a boundary right across my tired face, restoring the horizon in a complicated place. The blinding radiation meets a heavy cotton shield. You hand me back the vision of the open golden field. Deflecting the glare, casting a deliberate shade. You don't erase the sun or try to stop the burning light. You angle the defense and keep my navigation right. I don't have to wander blindly on a dangerous track. You flip the heavy fabric and you give my focus back. Deflecting the glare, casting a deliberate shade. You don't erase the sun or try to stop the burning light. You angle the defense and keep my navigation right. I don't have to wander blindly on a dangerous track. You flip the heavy fabric and you give my focus back. Yeah. People wear expensive glasses trying to look the part. A superficial shield to guard a superficial heart. But driving through the setting sun requires a built-in block. A designated shadow acting as a solid dock. You adjust the angle softly till the blinding light is gone. A masterclass in helping me to quietly carry on. The dashboard sits in shadows and the road is running clear. But quiet reassurance that I do not have to fear. Pull the fabric down, block the golden ray. Watch the highway clear at the end of the day. The light is overwhelming but the shadow is secure. I trust the quiet boundary that makes the vision pure. I realize that loving is a geometric tilt. A willingness to shield me from the blinding and the guilt. You didn't ask to turn around and drive into the east. You offered the defense against the overwhelming beast. I gripped the steering wheel and let my tired shoulders drop. Grateful for the shadow that allowed the fear to stop. The sunset paints the asphalt in the deep and vivid red. I cruise into the evening trusting everything you said. The visor holds the line and keeps the blinding out of sight. I navigate the highway and I step into the night. Deflecting the glare, casting a deliberate shade. The quiet intervention in the choices that we made. You don't erase the sun or try to stop the burning light. You angle the defense and keep my navigation right. The blindness is defeated and the journey is secure. I trust your quiet boundary, and the love I know is pure. The sun sets, the vision holds, I am driving.
A row of metal fins attached upon the circuit board. A functional component that I previously ignored. The voltage used to surge and push the temperature too high. A devastating hazard underneath the quiet sky. The processors would choke and stutter on the heavy load. My mind was running high with the demands of every day. A fever pitch of panic that would never wash away. I thought that I was built to handle all the burning stress. A dangerous delusion leading to a massive mess. But you were like the copper fastened to the silicone, extracting all the fever so my spirit carries on. You pulled the toxic thermal wave away from my own core, allowing me to operate exactly like before. The fins absorb the rising heat and throw it in the air. A quiet intervention for a suffocating care. Drawing the heat, taking on the heavy burning strain. You don't just shut the power down or tell me not to feel. You absorb the heavy damage that is visceral and real. I don't have to self-destruct or melt into the ground. You stabilize the temperature and keep my spirit sound. Drawing the heat, taking on the heavy burning strain. You don't just shut the power down or tell me not to feel. You absorb the heavy damage that is visceral and real. I don't have to self-destruct or melt into the ground. You stabilize the temperature and keep my spirit sound. people try to cool the anger with an icy block. A brutal sort of conscience causing an immediate shock. But sudden temperature divides will shatter fragile glass. A devastating consequence of watching seasons pass. You offer a conductor and a natural release, a slow and steady pathway to a necessary peace. The copper fins are warm, the touch absorbing what I give. The only reason that the inner circuitry can live. Take the rising heat, push it to the air, save the fragile boy standing quietly there. The voltage is aggressive but the metal holds the line. I trust the quiet physics making the protection mine. I realize that loving is a thermodynamic art, a willingness to act as a conductor for the heart. You didn't unplug the system or abandon me in smoke. You neutralized the danger in the bitter words I spoke. The amplifier runs without a stutter or a stall, a testament to facing down the demons on the wall. I place my target hand against the surface of the brass and let the cooling shadows of the evening slowly pass. The system is protected and the music plays so clear. I trust the steady element that you established here. Drawing the heat, taking on the heavy, burn stride, safe inside. Drawing the heat, nowhere to hide, nowhere to hide. No, you don't just shut the power down. Oh, tell me not to feel you. Extract the heavy fever that is undeniably real. The temperature is normal and the circuitry is whole. I rest upon the copper fins and save my tired soul. The heat is gone, the board is safe, I am running.
A heavy piece of plastic holding a transparent roll, a tool designed to separate and finalize a goal. We used to pull the ribbon out and press it on the steel. The sharper feel, the metal blade had tiny teeth to execute a line, a clean and crisp severing of your history and mine. But we pulled it in aggressive angle on a winter day, a violent maneuver that took all the teeth away. The metal edge grew dull and lost the point of silver bite, a tragic little failure in the middle of the night. I pulled the clear adhesive down to make a sudden cut, but dragging on the ruined metal only caused a rut. The tape began to stretch into a thin and ugly string, a terrifying metaphor for every broken thing. The plastic pulls and stretches out, refusing to divide. A messy execution where the ugly fragments hide. I try to slice the ending, but the metal doesn't catch. It drags into a messy and an unforgiving match. You cannot make a clean division when the blade is dead. I stare at the distortion of the bitter words we said, losing the teeth, stretching on a ruined silver line. I try to slice the ending, but the metal doesn't catch. It drags into a messy and an unforgiving match. You cannot make a clean division when the blade is dead. I stare at the distortion of the bitter words we said. I tried to use my fingernail to puncture through the tape, to force a rapid exit and a sudden sharp escape. But picking at the plastic leaves a jagged, dirty tear, a desperate avoidance of the heavy, dark despair. We forced the conversation, but we lacked the edge to quit. A slow and agonizing stretch, and we refuse to admit the string of tape is tangled in a sticky, ugly ball, a visual translation of the tragedy of it all. Pull the plastic out, watch the ribbon bend, fail to make the cut, drag the bitter end. The separation is corrupted and the edge is gone. I do not have the instrument to cleanly carry on. I realize I'm forcing a depleted, broken soul is volunteering entrance for a dedicated fool. Love requires a boundary that knows the weight apart, not a stretched out ligament that ruins the tired heart. We ruined the foundation by ignoring all the signs, I smear the clear adhesive on our intertwining lines. I take a pair of scissors and I snip the ugly thread, accepting the reality of everything we bled. I drop the broken dispenser in the bottom of the trash and walk away from the illusion turning into ash. Stop losing the teeth, scratching on a blue windshield. Let it drop, I tried to slice the ending, but the metal had to fail. I surrender the illusion of a complicated tale. You cannot make a clean division when the blade is dead. I turn my collar upward and I clear my tired head. The tape is cut, the edge is dull. I am done. Black and rubber wire running right across the rug, connecting to the socket with a two-pronged little plug. We used to run the current to illuminate the room. A quiet little magic chasing out the winter gloom. The rubber was a shield against the voltage in the core, a flexible protection on the dusty wooden floor. But we kicked it and we dragged it on the corner of the wood, ignoring the fragility of where the copper stood. The outer layer split and showed the naked wires deep. My tired eyes could keep. I plugged it in the socket just to see if it would glow. A desperate maneuver on a path I shouldn't go. The naked lines collided and produced a tiny spark, a terrifying violence in the middle of the dark. The current is a hazard when the insulation dies. I am staring at a tragedy beneath the winter skies. I try to push the power, but the copper starts to smoke. A visual translation of the angry words we spoke. You cannot run the current when the safety is destroyed. I stand beside the outlet in an isolated void, stripped of the lead, burning on an exposed. A devastating failure of a functional design. I try to push the power, but the copper starts to smoke. A visual translation of the angry words we spoke. You cannot run the current when the safety is destroyed. I stand beside the outlet in an isolated void. I tried to wrap electrical tape around the open tear to orchestrate a rescue in the solitary air. But wrapping up an open wound just guarantees a fire. It doesn't cure the sickness of an unprotected wire. We let our sensitivities go naked to the touch. A catastrophic error of demanding way too much. The sparks fly up and singe the painted surface of the wall, a warning that the tragedy is waiting for the fall. Plug a heavy cord, watch the copper hit, fail to find the light, watch the sparks emit. The voltage is an enemy without a proper shield. I walk away completely from the dangerous dark field. I realize that forcing an unprotected vein is volunteering entrance to a solitary pain. Love requires a boundary to insulate the heat, not a naked vulnerability dying on the street. We broke the vital barrier by dragging it around and left the raw material exposed upon the ground. I pulled the plastic plug and cut the current to the wall, accepting the finale and the sadness of it all. I throw the broken cable in the garbage by the door. I cannot risk the danger of the sparks here anymore. Stripped of the lead, burning on and exposed. Let it dry, devastating failure of a functional design. Time to try to push the power, but the copper had to spark. I surrender the illusion to the isolating dark. You cannot run a current when the safety is destroyed. I turn my collar upward and I step into the void. The plug is out, the wire is dead. I am done. A pair of padded cotton resting by the oven door, an honest kind of armor I had never worn before. I used to pull the iron skillets with my naked hand, taking on the blisters in a burning kitchen land. The heat was just a consequence of trying to be fed, a daily dose of burning from the anxious words I said. The metal handles turned into a hazard in the glow, a rising temperature my weary fingers came to know. But you provided woven layers thick enough to hold a layer of defense against the stories we were told. You slide them on my hands and tell me I can face the stove, a padded sort of haven in a dark and dusty cove. The fabric takes the fever so my skin can stay intact, a reliable devotion and an undeniable fact. Braving the burn, reaching in the middle of the fire. You don't just turn the oven off or walk away in fear. You give me the equipment, keeping all the edges clear. Oh, I don't have to sear my flesh to carry out the meal. You take the deepest heat and validate the things I feel. Braving the burn, reaching in the middle of the fire, reaching in the middle of the fire. Steady shield against the very dangerous desire. You don't just turn the oven off or walk away in fear. You give me the equipment, keeping all the edges clear. I don't have to sear my flesh to carry out the meal. You take the deepest heat and validate the things I feel. People try to cook without a proper set of gear, ending up with burns they have to carry through the year. But cotton is a miracle when folded in a weave, a cushion for the panic that the tired lungs receive. The stains of butter decorate the outside of the mid, a record of the evenings where we both refused to quit. I grab the heavy roasting pan and pull it to the board, protected by the safety I had previously ignored. Slide the fabric on, face the rising heat, carry out the pan in the old defeat. The oven is a danger, but the cotton is a shield. I step into the kitchen and I never have to yield. I realize that loving is a barricade of cloth, the willingness to mediate the boiling of the broth. You didn't tell me I should leave the cooking to the side. You gave me an allowance for my overwhelming pride. I hold the cast iron and I set it on the rack, knowing I have armor that is never looking back. The kitchen smells of rosemary and roasting winter root, a masterpiece of walking down a complicated route. I take the padded fabric off and place it by the sink, grateful for the remedy that changes how I think. Braving the burn, reaching in the middle of the fire, safe and sound, steady shield against a very dangerous desire. You don't just turn the oven off or walk away in fear. You give me the equipment, keeping all the borders clear. The pan is resting safely and the dinner is complete. I trust your quiet armor as I navigate the heat. The stove is off, the hands are safe, I am home. A base of painted iron sitting on the granite space. I used to keep the paper towels rolling on the floor, a messy inconvenience rolling right towards the door. Every time I try to tear a single piece away, the cylinder would tumble in a frustrating display. The cardboard tube would unravel and scatter on the tile. A minor irritation adding up across the mile. But you brought in the metal pole and set it on the stone, a testament to knowing I was never here alone. You slid the paper cylinder upon the iron rod, a simple piece of logic from a sympathetic God. The bass remains unmoving when I pull the paper tight, a grounding intervention in the middle of the night. Tear the sheets, stand in the pool, holding down the center of the spin, a reliable foundation where the better days begin. You don't restrict the motion or forbid the tearing sound. You just provide the gravity to keep it on the ground. I can take exactly what I need without a chase. You are the steady iron in an unpredictable space. Stand in the pool, holding down the center of the spin, a reliable foundation where the better days begin. You don't restrict the motion or forbid the tearing sound. You just provide the gravity to keep it on the ground. I can take exactly what I need without a chase. You are the steady iron in an unpredictable space. People buy the flimsy plastic, falling on the floor, chasing down the messes they pretend they can't ignore. But weight is an essential tool for keeping order straight. The physical translation of an undeniable fate. The iron has a patina from sitting near the sink, a witness to the habits and the worried thoughts I think. I grab a paper towel just to wipe a sudden spill, and marvel at the quiet of your unrelenting will. Reach across the stone, pull the dotted line, hear the paper rip, note the balance is fine. The cylinder is turning but the metal base is still. I trust the heavy anchor and the comfort of your will. I realize that loving is a stationary block, a willingness to intercept an irritating shock. You didn't ask to wipe the spills or manage all the mess. You gave me the equipment to alleviate the stress. I tear another sheet to dry the water on the grain, appreciating how you always mitigate the pain. The kitchen is an ecosystem prone to sudden flaws, but you provide the gravity to follow natural laws. I look at the dispenser resting heavy on the gray and step into the rhythm of a steady, honest day. Standing up, holding down the center of the spin, safe inside, reliable foundation where the better days. Nowhere to hide. You don't restrict the motion or forbid the tearing sound. You just provide the gravity to keep it on the ground. The paper slices cleanly and the metal doesn't slide. I trust the quiet haven where my frantic worries hide. The base is firm, the mess is gone, I am resting. The hair is on the stage. A heavy sack of canvas sitting by the wooden stage, a weight designed to hold the rigging in a golden age. We filled the woven fabric up with gravel from the beach to ground the stage equipment that was drifting out of reach. A necessary anchor on a complicated road, but dragging heavy canvas over splinters leaves a mark, a microscopic puncture in the middle of the dark. I didn't see the tiny hole emerging on the seam, distracted by the fiction of a fascinating dream. The granules started leaking out and spilling on the floor, a tiny little hourglass behind the studio door. The bag is losing gravity with every passing week, a silent dissipation of the shelter I would seek, draining the sand try to hold the fabric, but the gravel slips away, leaving me a hollow shell at closing of the day. You cannot keep the anchor when the core begins to slide. I stare at the destruction where the empty promises hide, draining the sand, bleeding up the center of the way, a devastating symptom of an unrewarding fate. I try to hold the fabric, but the gravel slips away, leaving me a hollow shell at closing of the day. You cannot keep the anchor when the core begins to slide. I stare at the destruction where the empty promises hide. I try to patch the canvas with a strip of silver tape to execute a frantic and a temporary escape, but dust and grit refuse to let adhesive do the trick. A miserable failure, making my tired stomach sick. We forced our expectations on a compromise designed, ignoring the unraveling of your tired heart and mind. The stage is getting dangerous, the lights begin to sway, a visual reflection of the words we couldn't say. Watch the gravel fall, sweeping up the dirt. Nothing stops the leak, nothing heals the hurt. The bag is getting lighter and the structure lean, the saddest degradation that my tired eyes have seen. I realize that forcing an exhausted bag to hold is buying into fictions that the weary travelers sold. Love requires a vessel that is capable and whole, not a leaking fabric, drained in oxygen and soul. We ruin the foundation by ignoring the decay and watch the vital gravity just slowly wash away. I pick an empty canvas up and drop it in the bin, accepting the finale of the era we were in. I step away from holding up a compromised defense and walk into the avenue with heavy, cold suspense, draining the sand, bleeding out the center of the way. Let it drop, a devastating symptom of an unrewarding fate. Time to stop. I try to patch the fabric, but the gravel washed away. I surrendered the illusion of a monumental day. You cannot keep the anchor when the core begins to slide. I walk away completely and I swallow down my pride. The bag is empty, the stage is dark, I am done.
Heavy silver wrench resting on the cellar floor, a tool I used to navigate the fixing of the door. The spiral gear was meant to change the distance of the jaw. We kept it in the toolbox where the basement shadows creep, a cold and damp environment where rusted monsters sleep. The moisture got inside the thread and oxidized the steel, erasing the mobility I desperately want to feel. I pulled it from the plastic case to fix a leaking pipe, a solitary answer to a suffocating gripe. I thumbed the little spiral gear to open up the bite, expecting an adjustment in the middle of the night. But iron turned to concrete and the wheel refused to spin, the tragic little prison we are permanently in. The jaw's locked forever at a quarter of an inch. I try to twist the metal but it doesn't give a flinch. Frozen at the grip, stuck upon a solitary size, a devastating ending underneath the cellar skies. I try to turn the gear but the rust refuses to yield, the paralyzed illusion on the devastated field. You cannot fix fix a problem when the instrument is dead. I stand inside the darkness with the bitter words we said. Frozen at the grip, stuck upon a solitary side. A devastating end underneath the cellar skies. I try to turn the gear, but the rust refuses to yield. A paralyzed illusion on a devastated field. You cannot fix a problem when the instrument is dead. I stand inside the darkness with the bitter words we said. I sprayed a little solvent on the edges of the thread to orchestrate a rescue for the heavy tears I shed. But chemicals don't penetrate a petrified design. They only leave a greasy stain on your mistakes and mine. We trapped the conversation in a very narrow gauge, refusing to adjust it for a complicated age. The wrench is just a paperweight and then Cooper it goes. The cruel and heavy mockery of what I needed most. Push the frozen gear, scrape the bleeding thumb, waiting for the shift that will never come. The gap is set in stone and the water starts to leak. I do not have the flexibility I need to seek. I realize that loving is an adaptable embrace, a willingness to modify the borders of the space. If you refuse to compromise and lock the metal tight, you forfeit the capacity to fix things in the night. We left the tool abandoned to the damp and bitter air, and engineered a monument to unresolved care. I dropped the heavy silver in the bottom of the trash and watched the stubborn history reduced to silent ash. I cannot stop the water with a paralyzed machine. I walk out of the basement and I wash my spirit clean. Frozen at the grip, stuck upon a solitary side. Let it drop, a devastating ending underneath the cellar sky. Time to stop, try to turn the gear, but the instrument was dead. I surrender the illusion and I clear my tired head. You cannot fix a problem when the metal refuses to yield. I walk into the avenue and leave the broken field. The jaw is stuck, the water flows, I am done.
Piece of heavy canvas sliding off the sewing board, a complicated pattern I had previously ignored. I tried to fold the edges to create a sturdy seam, to fabricate a shelter for an ordinary dream. But denim is a stubborn and a very rigid skin. I use my tired fingers just to press the layers down, a miserable struggle in the center of the town. My hands began to cramp and let the fabric slip away, a disorganized mess in the middle of the day. But you brought out a clip of faded yellow brass, a quiet intervention letting all the panic pass. You squeezed the metal spring and bit the cotton tight, restoring the alignment in the fading of the light. And tension is relieved and the corners finally meet, a beautiful surrender to a savored holding it in. Secure in the fold, keeping the fabric in a line, a rugged sort of anchor making your affection mine. You do not let the heavy cotton unravel in the breeze. You clamp the rigid edges and you bring me to my knees. I don't have to wrestle with the chaos on my own. You provide a steady boundary that I have always known. Secure in the fold, keeping the fabric in a line, a rugged sort of anchor making your affection mine. You do not let the heavy cotton unravel in the breeze. You clamp the rigid edges and you bring me to my knees. I don't have to wrestle with the chaos on my own. You provide a steady boundary that I have always known. People use a fragile pin that bends beneath the weight, a temporary bandage for a complicated fate. But you prefer a mechanism built to take the strain, a dedicated artifact protecting from the rain. The brass is turning darker where my thumb has left a mark, a tangible companion in the center of the dark. I run the silver needle right across the steady groove, trusting that the heavy cotton isn't going to move. Press the metal spring, clamp the edges tight, so the honest seam underneath the light. The fabric stays together and the panic fades to gray. I rest inside the boundary you establish here today. I realize that loving is a very tactile grip, a willingness to stabilize a sinking heavy ship. You didn't ask to stitch the seam or claim the final art. You offered a foundation for my complicated heart. I tie the final knot and lay the heavy needle down, protected from the chaos of this unpredictable town. The canvas forms a shelter that is durable and wide, a very private universe where weary spirits hide. I trace the brass clip and I let my shoulders drop, grateful for the anchor where my anxious habits stop. Secure in the fold, keeping the fabric in a line, safe and sound, of anchor making your affection mine. On the ground, let the heavy cotton unravel in the breeze. You clamp the rigid edges and alleviate the tease. The shelter is completed and the boundary is secure. I trust the quiet metal and a love I know is pure. The seam is tight, the brass holds, I am home.
A pillar of white paraffin burning in the hall, a quiet little fire casting shadows on the wall. The wick was burning heavy and the wax began to run. I used to let the liquid spill directly on the wood, ruining the surface right exactly where it stood. The melted wax would harden into ugly rigid stains, a visual reminder of my solitary pains. I spent my morning scraping off the residue of night, a miserable habit in the early fading light. But you slid a brass collar right beneath the burning core to intercept the damage right before it hits the floor. The white metal saucer gathers every falling tear, erasing the anxiety and mitigating fear. The liquid hits the brass and catching the drop, taking all the burning messy heat. A quiet intervention for a runaway defeat. You do not tell the fire to stop burning in the dark. You simply shield the table and preserve the vital spark. I don't have to ruin everything I try to build. You offer a perimeter where I am gently stilled. Catching the drop, taking all the burning messy heat. A quiet intervention for a runaway defeat. You do not tell the fire to stop burning in the dark. You simply shield the table and preserve the vital spark. I don't have to ruin everything I try to build. You offer a perimeter where I am gently stilled. People try to moderate the flame, to keep it neat, denying the vitality of a magnificent heat. But you prefer the wildness and the unpredictable glow, the honest sort of passion that my weary heart can know. The brass saucer catches all the overflow of white, a tactile diary of a complicated night. I trace the hardened droplets on the surface of the gold. freedom and the surface is secure. I trust the quiet harbor that is undeniable pure. I realize that loving is a designated shield, a willingness to occupy a very messy field. You didn't ask to put the candle out and sit in gray. You managed the collateral and made the shadows stay. I watched the orange flicker and I let my shoulders drop, grateful for the boundary where my anxious habits stop. The table is unblemished and the light is shining bright. We manufactured safety in the middle of the night. I run my thumb across the cooling wax upon the ring and listen to the melody the quiet evening sing. Catching the drop, taking all the burning messy heat. Safe inside. A quiet intervention for a runaway defeat. Nowhere to hide. You do not tell the fire to stop burning in the dark. You intercept the damage and you guard the vital spark. The timber is protected and the panic fades away. I trust your quiet armor as I wake to face the day. The wax is caught. The desk is safe, I am warm.
A little slip of paper resting on the windowsill, a victim of the summer in a solitary chill. We got it from a diner on a Tuesday afternoon, a memory we thought that we were visiting so soon. The black ink was a record of the coffee and the pie, a physical translation of an ordinary sky. But thermal paper doesn't like the ultraviolet ray. It acts as an eraser, pulling history away. I left it on the timber, exposed to all the light, ignoring the slow vanishing happening inside. I picked the little rectangle up to read the heavy print, to find a confirmation or a solitary hint. But the surface wasn't empty and an intimidating white, a phantom of the diner in the middle of the night. The transaction is deleted by the chemistry of sun, tragic illustration that the narrative is done. I try to read the history, but the ink is washed away. A silent execution of an ordinary day. You cannot prove a promise when the document is dead. I stare at the distortion of the quiet words we said. I try to read the history, but the ink is washed away. A silent execution of an ordinary day. You cannot prove a promise when the document is dead. I stare at the distortion of the quiet words we said. I tried to hold the paper at a very tilted angle, to rescue some reality from this forgotten tangle. But ghosts do not negotiate when sunlight steals the dye. They vanish in the quiet of an unapologetic sky. We thought our steady promise was an undeniable fact, but neglected all the weather on the solitary track. The slip is just a meaningless and blank deserted square, a visual confession of a solitary despair. Stare at the blank page, rub the empty white. The memory is gone, fading in the night. The proof is just an echo of a very distant past. We built a weak foundation that was never meant to last. I realized that clinging to a fabricated fading printed line. You cannot find a future in the sun-depleted sign. We left a good intention sitting open on the wood and sacrificed the memory of exactly where we stood. I crumpled a blank paper in a tiny useless ball and tossed it in the garbage, disregarding it all. I do not need a receipt to validate the pain. I turn my collar upward and I step into the rain. Let it blueprint, melting on a tiny drop. I tried to read the history, but the sun erased the ink. I surrender the illusion and forget the things I think. You cannot prove a promise when the document is dead. I drop the ruined paper and I walk the street instead. The paper is blank, the ink is gone, I am leaving. A tiny steel hexagon buried in the wooden frame. We try to pull the structure into an absolute in mind. I place the silver wrench into the center of the core, expecting the resistance that I felt the day before. I twisted down the handle with an arrogant demand I couldn't understand. The metal slipped and rounded off the corners of the hole, a physical translation of a suffocated soul. The tool just spins in circles without catching on a side, a quiet little trap where the weary shadows hide. The grip is gone entirely, the intersection dead, a visual reality of bitter things we said. The driver rotates freely inside the ruined face, a solitary motion in a devastated space. I try to turn the lever, but the metal refuses to catch. We burned away the friction and eradicated the match. You cannot tighten up a bond when the corners turn to dust. I stare at the destruction of a solitary trust. They try to turn the lever, but the metal refuses to catch. Oh, we burned away the friction and eradicated the match. You cannot tighten up a bond when the corners turn to dust. I stare at the destruction of a solitary trust. I tried to push a rubber band inside the empty gap to manufacture leverage on a solitary map. But adding superficial tricks to broken heavy steel is a cowardly avoidance of the panic that I feel. We force the conversation past the tolerance of the joint, demanding a perfection to an isolated point. The bolt is resting permanently trapped inside the wood, a terrifying lesson that we never understood. Twist the silver arm, feel the hollow spin, accept the quiet end where the tears begin. The angle is corrupted and the symmetry is gone. I do not have the friction to continue holding on. I realize that forcing a connection past the line is volunteering to destroy the original design. Love requires a mutual and delicate brand. We ruin the foundation by demanding it to yield and shatter the perimeter of a solitary field. I pull the metal tool away and drop it on the floor, accepting I will never turn the handle anymore. The shelf is hanging awkwardly, unfixable
invincible and sad. I walk away from fighting for the history we had. I tried to turn the lever, but the intersection failed. No, I know. I tried to turn the lever, but the intersection failed. I surrendered the illusion to the sorrow that prevailed. You cannot tighten up a bond when the corners turn to dust. I drop the broken instrument and leave the broken trust. The bolt is round, the grip is lost, I am done.
A ring of bent willow hanging by the window pane, a woven little shield against the autumn rain. The feathers sway a little as the midnight hours pass. I used to dread the closing of the fading afternoon, a dark arrival coming on a bit too soon. The nightmares wander freely in my tired head, a tangled mess of memory and uninvited dread. But you brought this woven web and tied it to the frame that didn't need a name. The stream, it's a labyrinth to catch the bit of fright, a guardian standing watch inside the fading light. You told me I could rest without a weapon in my hand, a reassuring logic I can finally understand. The bad dreams tangle in the center of the thread, leaving a steady harbor for my exhausted head. Catching the shadows, holding back the anxious tide, a safe perimeter where all the gentle hopes reside. You catch the panic right before it ever reaches me. Awakened morning is the only thing I have to see. I don't have to fight the phantoms on my own. You weave a haven and you make the comfort known. Catching the shadows, holding back the anxious tide, a safe perimeter where all the gentle hopes reside. You catch the panic right before it ever reaches me. Awakened morning is the only thing I have to see. I don't have to fight the phantoms on my own. You weave a haven and you make the comfort known. People try to run from all the terrors in the mind, leaving their foundations and their sanctuaries behind. But running only gives the dark an avenue to chase, a miserable marathon in an unforgiving place. You trust the woven cotton to absorb the rising fear, making sure the atmosphere is breathable and clear. The morning sun illuminates the center of the hoop, a masterpiece of comfort for a very tired troop. Watch the feathers sway, let the bad thoughts fade. Trust the woven string in the shelter made. The nightmares turn to dust inside the morning ray. I breathe the steady air and wake to face the day. I realize that loving is a permeable net, a boundary you draw and a standard that you set. You don't just lock the door and trap me in an empty room. You let the starlight in and filter out the gloom. I trace the wooden circle and I drop my tired guard, protected from the terrors in the overwhelming yard. The dawn is breaking soft across the corner of the bed, erasing every fraction of the bitter things I said. I reach across the pillow and I find your waiting hand, anchored in the safety of a peaceful waking land. Catching the shadows, holding back the anxious tide, safe inside the safe perimeter where all the gentle hopes reside. You catch the panic right before it ever reaches me. Awakened morning is the only thing my eyes can see. The dark is intercepted by a dedicated thread. I trust your steady armor and I rest my tired head. The sun is up, the web holds, I am safe.
strip of black rubber lining up the window frame, a practical defense against a winter game. The freezing wind was whistling through the narrow crack. I was never pushing back, I wore a thick coat inside the living room, surrendering my comfort to the icy creeping gloom. The temperature was dropping with the setting of the sun, a daily battle that my tired spirit never won. But she peeled the paper back and pressed the rubber tight, a tactical defense against the terror of the night. You were in the sticky adhesive down the margin of the glass, closing out the avenues where winter tries to pass. The howling of the tempest is reduced to just a hum, a brilliant preparation for the storms that ought to come. The gap is covered by steady line of foam, keeping all the weather on the outside of the home. Sealing the draft, holding all the heat inside, a reliable corner where the weary travelers hide. You find the invisible fissures in the wooden wall. You patch the broken borders and prevent the freezing fall. I walk around the bedroom without shivers in my spine. I trust the boundary that makes your shelter mine. Sealing the draft, holding all the heat inside, a reliable corner where the weary travelers hide. You find the invisible fissures in the wooden wall. You patch the broken borders and prevent the freezing fall. I walk around the bedroom without shivers in my spine. I trust the boundary that makes your shelter mine. People try to turn the heater to the maximum degree, ignoring all the leaking cracks that everyone can see. But throwing more fire at an open broken seam is a wasteful execution of a comfortable dream. You fix the foundation before you light the stove, a masterclass in navigating through this hidden cove. The foam absorbs the pressure of the slamming wooden door, a tiny little guardian I never saw before. Press the rubber down, stop the bitter breeze, warm the wooden floor, put my mind at ease. The insulation functions and the room is getting hot. I am grateful for the honest sanctuary that we got. I realize that loving is an art for the detail, a willingness to rectify the places where we fail. You didn't ask to knock the building down and start anew. You found the broken edges and you pushed the remedy through. I take my heavy jacket off and throw it on the chair, breathing in the comfort of the insulated air. The storm is raging on the outside of the pain, but I am disconnected from the sorrow and the rain. I lean against the glass and feel the barriers secure, a testament to an affection that is true and pure. Sealing the draft, holding all the heat inside, safe and warm, reliable corner where the weary travelers hide. Through the storm, find invisible fissures in the wooden wall. You patch the broken borders and prevent the freezing fall. The temperature is steady and the freezing wind is gone. I rest inside your haven and I quietly carry on. The gap is sealed, the room is warm, I am home.
A carved wooden box resting on the dusty shelf, a faded little memory I kept inside myself. We used to turn the handle on the bottom of the bass to fill the silence of a very empty place. The brass cylinder played the gentle lullaby. Yeah, but metal gets exhausted when you wind it up too tight. A flaw developing inside the fading light. I reached to spin the lever just to hear the tune again, a desperate navigation where the endings all begin. I twisted the silver but it didn't catch the gear, a frictionless rotation confirming all my fear. The key just slides in circles with a grating hollow sound, a disconnected engine where no music can be found. The winding key revolves inside an empty broken spin. The brass refuses to engage the tired gears within. The empty turns, sliding on a broken thread. I try to win the music music, but the tension slips away, leaving me in the silence of a gray and faded day. You cannot force a melody when the inner spring is dead. I stare at the machinery and clear my tired head. The empty turn, sliding on a broken thread. I try to run the music, but the tension slips away, leaving me in the silence of a gray and faded day. You cannot force a melody when the inner spring is dead. I stare at the machinery and clear my tired head. The lever with the downward heavy press to orchestrate a rescue from this unrewarding mess. But force and broken mechanics only widens up the gap. A frantic navigation on a devastating map. We forced our expectations on a fragile little frame, demanding a perfection in a terrifying game. The notes are locked forever in the little metal pins. A tragedy confirming where the apathy begins. Just the metal key, hear the hollow scrape. The music is a ghost with no avenue of escape. The friction is deleted and the harmony is gone. I do not have the tension to continue holding on. I realize the force and in them response a spring is robbing the foundation of the song it wants to sing. Love requires an engine that connects the pushing hand, a tactile validation in a complicated land. We've stripped the inner workings by demanding way too much and ruined the capacity of any gentle touch. I leave the wooden box upon the corner of the desk, accepting the finale of this complicated risk. I walk into the hallway and I leave the silence there. I step into the avenue and breathe the open air. The empty turn, sliding on a broken thread. Let it drop, let it drop. Try to wind the music, but the mechanism failed. I surrendered the illusion to the sorrow that prevailed. Yeah, you cannot force a melody when the inner spring is dead. I walk away from the instrument and face the road ahead. The key turns, the room is quiet. I am done. Heavy steel you lock, fastened to the iron rack. A barrier defending an abandoned dusty track. We parked the bicycle when autumn started turning cold. A temporary pause before the story got too old. The metal was a promise to secure the riding frame, a confident maneuver in a necessary game. But winter brought the snow and left a coat of dark red rust, an agonizing rotting of a dedicated trust. I brought the silver key to liberate the frozen bar, to navigate the distance and remember who we are. I pushed it in the cylinder and gave a firm demand, a twist of expectation I could barely understand. But the internal pins were petrified into a block, a devastating ending for a heavy metal lock. The rust consumed the cylinder and eats the moving parts. I am staring at a tragedy for two exhausted hearts. Locked in the rain, trapped against the iron bar, a devastating portrait of exactly who we are. I try to turn the key, but the inner chamber binds, a physical reflection of our disconnected minds. You cannot force an opening when the rust is taking hold. I leave the broken bicycle to suffer in the cold. Suffer in the cold. Locked in the rain, trapped against the iron bar, a devastating portrait of exactly who we are. Try to turn the key, but the inner chamber binds, a physical reflection of our disconnected minds. You cannot force an opening when the rust is taking hold. I leave the broken bicycle to suffer in the cold. I tried to kick the shackles cycle just to break the rigid bind, to orchestrate a rescue from my isolating mind. But dying doesn't listen to an angry, tired shoe. It holds the jurisdiction over everything we do. We left our dedication in the middle of a storm, ignoring the decay of a comfortable norm. The bike is chained forever to a rusty fading post, a monument belonging to an unredeemed ghost. Push the silver key, feel the stubborn block. The wheels are turning flat beside the rusted lock. The avenue is empty and the tires lose their air. I am standing in the wreckage of a complicated care. I realize the force in a corroded pin to turn is adding heavy fuel to an agonizing burn. Love requires maintenance to keep the entry clear. Got a reckless isolation feeding on a fear. We sacrifice the journey to a weather-beaten lock and trap the weary spirits on an unforgiving block. I pull the silver key and drop it in the nearest drain, accepting the reality of this persistent pain. I turn my collar upward and I walk the avenue, accepting that the riding is impossible to do. Locked in the rain, trapped against the iron bar, let it drop, a devastating portrait of time to stop. I try to turn the key, but the cylinder was dead. I surrendered the illusion and clear my tired head. You cannot force an opening when the rust is taking hold. I walk away completely and I leave it in the cold. The lock is stuck, the bike is bound.